Hello, welcome back. As the year starts, I of course have compiled a big list of books that I want to read. I usually find recommendations online. Rarely, if ever, are they from my relatives or my friends, but I have managed to narrow it down to 25 books that are higher on my priority list. I also wanted to keep it to a lot of newer authors or authors that I haven't read in a while because I want to expand my range of reading. Also, none of these books are going to be released in 2025. These are just older books that I want to get to. The first one is very basic, but as I'm trying to read more classics, I really want to read Jane Eyre this year by Charlotte Bronte. I bought it last year and I kind of wanted to read it during the autumn time, but I didn't get around to it, so this might be a read that I will get to later in the year. But I know that it has a very thematic atmosphere to it, and I've been wanting to read it for a very, very long time. Another classic is Emma by Jane Austen. I have heard that it's a pretty fun one. I did get Pride and Prejudice for Christmas, but I think Emma, for some reason, I've assigned it to spring. I think it might be from like the movie or something, I don't know, but in my head it's a very spring book, so I want to read it in the spring. And Pride and Prejudice, I feel that it's more autumn as well. Then it's Mrs. Dalloway by Virginia Woolf. I think I read the first paragraph of the book, and as I was reading the first paragraph, I knew I wasn't in the right space to read that, so I put it on the side for a bit. But I do want to get to it this year. I had to read A Room of One's Own for class, so I'm more accustomed to the way she writes now, and I think I have a better perception of what I'm going to get myself into. It is her most popular book, and I have a very strong interest in reading her works, but I think this one is going to be pretty good to start with, especially because it's short. Then I really want to read On Beauty by Zadie Smith. I bought it last year, and I remember being in the bookstore and reading the back and like the themes. I kind of forgot what the themes were. I think it's about life and love. I'm not exactly sure, but the interest I had when I read the back was so strong that I bought the book, so I'm pretty sure I'm going to like it, and everyone says amazing things about Zadie Smith, which is why I wanted to read one of her books, but that was the one that called to me the most. I also put Sula by Toni Morrison. Same thing. I really wanted to read some Toni Morrison. People who love James Baldwin's writing tend to really like Toni Morrison as well, and I want to expand my reading from authors of color, and I know that Toni Morrison talks about those themes in a very pertinent way, which is why I wanted to read one of her books, and Sula is usually one that people tend to love. I was kind of hesitating between Sula and The Bluest Eye, but they didn't have the other one, so I got Sula instead. Then I would really like to read Yellow Phase by R.F. Kuang this year. I'm actually currently reading The Poppy War. It was kind of a spur of the moment read because I didn't have much interest in it, and I owned Babel already, so I thought I was going to start with Babel at some point, but Babel was really intimidating for me for some reason. And Yellowface has been talked about a lot, and I think the themes of the story, race, and the cultural appropriation is going to be really interesting. And having already had a taste for her writing, I know that I'm not going to be as intimidated as I would have been if I'd started with Babel. A summer read that I really want to get to this year is Outline by Rachel Cusk. I've heard her speak a few times, or I've watched videos of her talking a few times, and I find her a little hard to follow when she speaks. I find myself to be not smart enough to really get what she means, but I feel that writing is going to be easier because I can take as much time as I need to understand the story, and again, it's a book that's been very highly praised, and it's also perfect read for summer. I'm pretty sure it takes place in Greece. Now, this is an author I've already read, but I've only read a tiny piece of writing from her, but I really would like to read Just Kids by Patti Smith this year. Again, it's a book that I own. It's a memoir. I read Devotion by her and I really enjoyed her writing, so I know I'm going to like it. And not even because her life was so significant at the time and the place that she was in, but especially from her writing. I've heard people say that the writing is really moving, the story is very moving. I was talking about Baldwin earlier, and I haven't read one of his works in a really long time, but I really want to get to If Beale Street Could Talk. I bought it over the summer and I didn't get to it, and the last time that I read Baldwin I was probably too young to really enjoy what he talks about and to really get it. But I think that now that I'm older and I've read a lot more academic text, I can enjoy things with more nuance. And I know that Baldwin packs a lot in what he talks about. Next is The Nightingale by Kristen Hanna. This is a story about World War II. I'm pretty sure it takes place in Paris, and I think it's about two sisters. I've heard that it's just a very emotional, and sometimes I'm in the mood for a very emotional, long, painful story, and I wanted to put one of those books in this list so that I could get to it at some point. Similarly, I put A Thousand Splendid Suns by Khaled Hosseini. This is a story about war and resistance again, and I read Swimming in the Dark in December. It kind of opened me to a genre that I was not necessarily interested in before, but now I definitely am, and I especially want to read about the conflicts that are taking place as we speak, because it's educational as well as it is important. Another author that I've loved but I haven't read in a while is Caleb Azuma Nelson, and I haven't gotten to Small Worlds by him. If I'm not mistaken, it's a story on a son and a father, and I really, really, really enjoyed his writing in Open Water. It's one of my favorite books, both because the writing was beautiful and the story was great, but also because it was very significant in the talks about race. I just really enjoyed what I read from him, so I want to read more. Moving on to another summary book, I put down Sunburn by Chloe Michelle Howard. I have heard it being compared to Normal People and Call Me By Your Name. It does also take place in Ireland. It is a sapphic story, and I think the main character is in her adolescent years, and she feels a disconnect to the rest of the world. And I've never read a sapphic story, so I think this will be very special. Then I put All Fours by Miranda July. Again, it's a book that's been talked about a lot. It's in the same genre as books like Bunny, where we follow a female protagonist who kind of goes insane, I believe. Another author in that kind of genre is Otessa Moshfegh, and I really want to read Death in Her Hands by her. I read My Year of Rest and Relaxation a long time ago. Death in Her Hands has been on my list for a very, very, very long time, and I still haven't gotten to it, but this year, hopefully I will. This year I also heard a lot about Clarice Lispector, and I really want to read The Hour of the Star. I didn't really have a specific book by her that I wanted to read. I just knew I wanted to read Clarice Lispector, and The Hour of the Star is one of her most liked books, most talked about at least. And I think it's about loneliness, which is a theme that I tend to enjoy in books. Another book that tackled loneliness is Stoner by John Williams. I actually heard about it fairly recently, but I've seen two people put it on their favorite books of the year. It was an instant interest for me. I was talking about books about resistance and about conflicts that are still taking place earlier, and one of the books that I want to read is Minor Detail by Adanya Shibli. It's about Palestine and Israel, and the people who have read it have only said amazing things, and I still haven't read a book about Palestine, and it's about time that I do. Even though I've read academic texts for some classes, I haven't gotten around to any fiction, but I really want to get into at least one of them this year. Then I have a few French books. The first one is Yoga by Emmanuel Carrère. It talks about his relationship to yoga, but from the point of view of his depression. It was recommended by the author of my favorite book of last year, so that's how I heard about it. I also really want to read some Camus. He wrote The Outsider, and one of the books I want to read is Nos Suivis de l'été, which is kind of a ode to summer in Algeria, and it's very descriptive. I tried reading it over the summer, but again, I was not in the right mood for that book at the time, but this year, hopefully I will get to it. Then I put Ce que le jour doit à la nuit by Yasmina Khadra. In English, it's What the Day Owes the Night. My grandma loves this author. This is the book that called to me the most. I also put Bonjour Tristesse by Françoise Sagan, which is a book that caused controversy at the time that it was published because it talks about sexuality from a girl's point of view, and I'm pretty sure she wrote it when she was fairly young, and it caused a bit of outrage because people didn't expect women to think about sex. This next book is Moi qui n'ai jamais connu les hommes by Jacqueline Armand, or Armand. She is a Belgian author, and in English the book is called I Who Have Never Known Men. So perhaps you've heard about it. The premise of the story doesn't necessarily call to me. It's about women being locked or stuck in a bunker for a very, very, very long time, and then the youngest one doesn't even remember or recall the life outside, and then I'm pretty sure they get out. But I've heard it talks about the condition of womanhood very well, and I've never heard a bad critic about this book, which is largely why I want to read it, but also because I, as you might have seen, have a very strong interest in feminist literature. Next is Qui a tué mon père by Édouard Louis. I know it's been translated into English as well, but I forgot the title. But it's about a son and his father and the difficult relationship between them. In all honesty, I've never had an interest in those kinds of books until I read my favorite book of last year, which was La prochaine fois que tu mordras la poussière. But after having read that, I think I'm more interested in that dynamic than I was. Maybe it's growth, but I used to actively stay away from books written by men centering the male experience, partly because it's not relevant to my life, or so I thought, and partly because I am dubious about how women are going to be portrayed in those kinds of books. But I was so pleasantly surprised by my favorite book of last year and how much I could relate that I think I've kind of opened my senses to that. So that's a French book that I really want to read. And then finally, I want to read Les Années by Annie Ernaux. It's been translated into The Years. It's a non-fiction memoir with maybe a few fictional elements. Maybe it's more autofiction than it is non-fiction. I've been wanting to read her works for a bit, and I only read a collection of, like, not even stories, but just experiences that she's had in a specific area in Paris. And it was just very small paragraphs about what she saw. And after having read that, which was 2 years ago, I think, I wasn't necessarily interested in reading more of her, but she is a very well-known and well-loved French author, and I just don't think I read the right book from her. She did win a Pulitzer, so I'm sure it's going to be valuable as a read. As for my reading goals this year, I put 50 books again on Goodreads. I don't really care about achieving that number. The only thing I care about is reading 12 French books. And by French books, I really mean books written in French originally, because I just read a book that was translated from Japanese and French, but I really want to read more French books. Because since I started reading again, I've not necessarily been that interested in French literature, but I think that now I am a lot more, and I really enjoy the storytelling from French authors or French-speaking authors. I guess another goal would be to read half of these books if I can, because usually I kind of pick up what I think I'm in the mood for, so it's not as if I am 100% dedicated to this and I will force myself to read these books if I don't want to, especially because I have the assumption that I'm going to adore all these books, so it would be pointless to read them at a time that I'm not ready for them. But yeah, that's my list. If you have a list, let me know. I hope this was enjoyable. I'll see you fairly soon, but yeah, bye.